I think it really says something about how much Marvel and DC have oversaturated the market with superhero and comic book media that I really didn't feel like watching anything comic book related until yesterday when I was bored and on New Year's Day, and somebody else had already bought a digital copy of it, so I was essentially getting to see it for free. And that's a shame because it means good stuff like this ends up getting buried along with the junk. And it's not just the themselves that they're hurting with this oversaturation. For instance, I used to be on my edge of my seat waiting for each new episode of My Hero Academia. Now, I just it with everything else comic book related is just like the comic book stuff I'm now watching or reading is stuff that falls outside of any sort of typical comic book media like Spy Family. And don't get me wrong, this is a better movie than Volume 2. In fact, I will say this. This is the first time that I have seen a a Marvel comic book trilogy of films end without my being vastly disappointed. And that may have something to do with the fact that James Gunn is moving on, so Marvel didn't really have any power over him. So this is the first time, I think, in the history of Marvel films where there haven't been like a dozen studio executives all wanting their own ideas now in the third movie, and all talking about and all doing all these reshoots and everything to try and make it better or make it appeal even broader, when usually the trajectory of these things is that the second movie has the broadest appeal of all of them, and maybe you should have just done more of what you did in the second movie, but that never seems to occur to them. Every time something becomes successful, it then seems to draw the attention of executives who, here's the thing, film companies need executives. They need guys who know how to handle the money. They know guys who know how to make the deals that get the movie shown in theaters in the first place. They need those guys. But there's a limited amount of stuff you can learn as a human being because you have a limited lifespan, right? So they've spent their time learning the business end. They really don't understand the creative end. And the same thing happens when you have creative people try to run the business end. 9 times out of 10, it ends in complete financial disaster. You only have to look at Heaven's Gate, which I know. Some people consider that to be a classic, and yes, it may be, but it also bankrupted its studio. So maybe there should have been somebody overseeing the business end a little more. But I think Hollywood works best when the business guys stick to their stuff and the creative and they just hire writers, directors, and producers they trust to get the creative stuff done. And I think that was more or less what happened here. However, there are a couple of gripes I have. First of all, the only problem with having your writer and your director be the same person is that your writer and director can sometimes not know when to make cuts at the scripting stage. This story could have been told in 2 hours, just like the previous 2 movies. It did not need to be a 2.5-hour epic. I felt like some scenes went on a little too long, and like maybe they had one joke too many in them. That said, unlike other movies in its genre of the past few years, the jokes are actually funny. At least James Gunn knows how to structure a joke, and knows that humor normally comes from people with different viewpoints, butting heads, and people and And that so you have to have different personalities. My main problem with a lot of media today is everybody seems to have the same bland corporate personality because they're afraid of offending anyone, and James Gunn definitely doesn't have that problem in this movie. And my other main gripe with the movie is that it feels like a sequel to a movie, to not to the previous two movies, but to a movie that I missed. This feels like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 4, not Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And what I mean by that is everything's weirdly different. Like, I guess undoing the Thanos snap caused Nebula to be a Gamora, I mean, to be a different person. So is Nebula. Everybody's acting differently, but then for some reason, I don't know. I feel like they could have explained what's going on a little better because I felt lost. And I watched this with people who have seen this movie before, and they were lost, and they're still lost as to why characters are acting the way they are and why. And like, if the whole history of the universe, then shouldn't things be vastly different? Since, I mean, if Gamora was now the one taken by the Ravagers, as they say in this movie, after the Thanos snap, then shouldn't the whole history of the MCU be vastly different? I don't know. I was just confused by the whole thing. And if this was explained in Endgame, well, I'm sorry. I don't really feel like going back. I'm sorry. I found that movie to be average. It was a yeah. I enjoyed it, but it was average for me. And and sometimes I've been tempted to go back and rewatch it, but when I look at the runtime of like 3.5, nearly 4 hours, I'm like, yeah, do I really want to set aside that huge a block of my day just to rewatch something I already saw? And that's the problem with that. And plus, I talked to other people, and I'm pretty sure I guess maybe all the differences were covered in one of the Disney Plus shows or something, which I don't have Disney Plus, and I can't watch through all the shows just to try and figure out why why Star Lord is now calling Nebula his sister, and why Gamora now hates him. I can't. I'm sorry, I just can't watch every single Disney Plus show, and that's the weakness of the cinematic universe. So, but the two, but that was the biggest weakness of this movie. Other than that, this is a surprisingly heartfelt movie that actually has stakes that I care about. Mainly because they don't try to put the entire universe under threat again. It's like every Marvel movie, the entirety of the multiverse now has to be under threat, and it just gets boring after a while because it's it's not something that you can relate to on a personal level. I'm sorry, it just isn't. It's like, and I think it's interesting that the only two movies that have made me care about it reduce it down, have made me care since Endgame, about the stakes since Endgame, have they've both kept things on a very personal level. Yes, there was the existential threat to the whole multiverse in No Way Home, but they kept the threat down to but they kept the focus on what does this mean for Peter Parker. And likewise here, this is really Rocket's movie, and boy is this is the darkest of the Guardians movies. Way dark. But it also has a lot of heart, which again is something that I feel is lacking in the MCU of late. If they want to salvage this, they need to look at Guardians 3, which I think is the only movie they released last year that made money, as a blueprint going forward of what to do. Tell more personal stories with cool action scenes, and have have heart to them, and give every character, regardless of their gender or how they identify, a you know, relatable plot arcs and stakes in the story. And I was very much surprised that, given all the backlash he's faced online and stuff, that Disney let Chris Pratt's character, Star Lord, actually have a good finale and not just be completely incompetent and cause all the problems. Because I know people online hate Chris Pratt, and that tends to dictate how the actors who portray the characters are perceived online really seems to decide for Disney what the characters are allowed to do in the film. But yeah, but this was, but yeah, I was surprised at how good this was, since I'm completely burnt out on Marvel, and this will probably be the point where I just stop paying any attention to Marvel, because it feels like a good point to leave the series. It feels like a good point to leave the MCU on. There, there's a heartfelt ending. Everyone's character arcs are sewn up. They it we I mean my biggest and it's and it's a really good summer action movie, and it was and yeah, I still like the first Guardians better than this, but I'd say I like this better than Guardians 2, which I also like Guardians 2. So for me, it's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 for how this trilogy, stacks up. But my another minor complaint I have is that the High Evolutionary, I did not like him as a villain, simply because he seemed to be unhinged and just I didn't buy him as a true threat, because he seemed to be doing this thing that all Disney villains do lately, where he was just ranting and raving about everything, and everything seemed to send him into like a blind rage, and he seemed to be panicking over every little thing that went wrong. And to me, that's not how you write a menacing villain. That just doesn't work for me. But other than that, but it's like even though I couldn't track the characters from the previous, but I want to point out that the complaints I've had are so minor. Even even though I couldn't track the characters from the past two movies, I could track their character arcs within this film, and that felt good to be able to do. And I could relate to all of them, and yeah, I will warn you that if you don't have a strong stomach, there are some scenes with Rocket to do with his past that are like really rough. So if seeing animals mistreated gives you trouble at all, I would avoid this movie. But for everyone else, I would say, yeah, see this movie if you didn't already. I know this is a really late review for this movie, but I only just saw it, and I was surprised. And I think I think if this movie had come out closer to Guardians of the Galaxy number two, I think this would have been $1 billion movie, and I think more people would have been talking about it. I just think it was bad timing, and that's the other weak point. I guess this review is more me talking about how the has just evolved into me talking about the weaknesses that a cinematic universe. I mean, for the past 10 years, we've seen the strengths of what a cinematic universe can do for boosting your product. But now this is showing the weaknesses, in that if you have a string of weaker products, it can affect the stronger products. Like, if it had come out at the height of the MCU, it would have been $1 billion movie, and I think people would have been talking about it. But I think people are so burnt out because of oversaturation, and I think that is the number one problem. That and some of the characters that they're pushing, but I think the number one problem, and this affects everyone, I think both Marvel and DC would be advised, if they want to continue making movies, to pull back and maybe each of them only do one movie every 2 years. That's what I would aim for the future of these, so that they feel like special. Because if this had felt special, I would have seen it and I would have been very impressed over this summer, but I didn't. But yeah, I really liked I really enjoyed everything about this movie. I just wish it had been a little shorter, because I found myself checking my watch towards the end because it felt like they were taking really long to get anywhere. For instance, one way I would have edited it is I would have had the children and the if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. I would have shortened the whole rescue scene, because I would have had just one big area that had both children and baby animals in it. And then you don't have to go to two places. You don't have to have two scenes that are almost identical of them rescuing things. You could have done it all at once, and that could have cut down on the runtime. I would have shortened some of the jokier scenes and stuff. But other than that, this is, once you get used to the fact that this isn't the same Guardians that you saw in Guardians 1 and 2, you will have a blast watching this. And yeah, it is one of the better films of the year, and it is probably going to be the last hurrah for a lot of people with Marvel. But I would say, even if you've sworn off comic book movies like I never intentionally said I'm never going to watch a comic book movie again. I just sort of burnt out, and I just couldn't work up the interest to spend money and spend the time and money to go into a theater and see one. I would say see this movie. You can get it in a bunch of different places. So, you know, if you like the first two movies, you're really gonna like this one, and you're gonna have, and I think this, I would say, well done, James Gunn and company. Despite a few minor complaints, this is just, it's amazing that you managed to pull off ending a trilogy on a high note in a studio that infamously micromanages as much as Marvel Studios and Disney. So, thank you so much for all the memories, James Gunn, and I'll give your Superman Legacy a chance if it comes out, because it is not looking good for Warner Brothers financially. I'm not sure if they have the money to launch another cinematic universe. I'm not sure if they have enough money to launch, a big budget superhero movie anymore. Not to mention a cinematic universe, because between budget and advertising, it's going to cost about $500 million. I'm not sure if they have that $500 million, but if it does happen, I'll give you a chance after seeing this. So enjoy this movie, because it is a good end to the trilogy. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.